The leadership environment in of itself is made up of the leader, the people, the situation, and the consequences. And so what comes to my mind when I think about that is the people. The idea that it's not about me, it's about the people. It's about understanding that the people that work for me are my greatest asset and the greatest value at risk. And so that really sets the stage for me to start thinking about that leadership environment.
Leadership comes into play on the fire line in many ways. First, you have to recognize the dynamic situation that we're working in. The fire environment is extremely dynamic, and the individuals that are working on that fire line are just as dynamic and diverse.
Fuels, weather, topography, all the factors that are associated with those three things, fire behavior itself, operational objectives, priorities that are shifting. You have friction that exists in the environment, friction's that force that makes simple things difficult and difficult things seemingly impossible. Uncertainty, what's known versus unknown in the environment to help base those decisions on. You have operational tempo, decision space, the fluidity, how are things moving in an incredibly dynamic environment. Understanding the situation, the environment, making sense of that is critical in the success of all those different arenas.
Ten years ago, on a Tuesday morning, I conducted a parachute jump at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. It was a routine training jump, like many more I'd done since I became a paratrooper 27 years before. We went down to the airfield early because this is the Army and you always go early. You do some routine refresher training and then you go to put on your parachute. Then you sit down and you wait a little while because this is the Army. Then you load the aircraft and then you stand up and you get on and you kind of load lumber to the aircraft like this in a line of people, and you sit down on canvas seats on either side of the aircraft and you wait a little bit longer because this is the Air Force teaching the Army how to wait. Then you take off. And it's painful enough now, and I think it's designed this way. It's painful enough so you want to jump. You didn't really want to jump, but you want out. The jump masters start to check the door. And then when it's time to go, jump master goes, go. The first guy goes, and you're just in line, and you just kind of lumber to the door. Jump is a misnomer. You fall. Now you prepare for the inevitable. You are going to hit the ground. You cannot delay that much. And you prepare to do a parachute landing fall. Now the Army teaches you to do 5 points of performance. The toes of your feet, your calves, your thighs, your buttocks, and your push-up muscle. And it's this elegant little land, twist, and roll, and that's not going to hurt. In 30-some years of jumping, I never did one. I always landed like a watermelon out of a third-floor window. And I'd look around, and then I'd see another paratrooper, a young guy or girl, and they'd be picking up their equipment. They'd be doing everything that we had taught them. And I realized that if they had to go into combat, they would do what we had taught them and they would follow leaders. And I realized that if they came out of combat, it would be because we led them well. And I was hooked again on the importance of what I did. So now I do that Tuesday morning jump, but it's not any jump. That was September 11th, 2001. And when we took off from the airfield, America was at peace. When we landed on the drop zone, everything had changed. And what we thought about the possibility of those young soldiers going into combat as being theoretical was now very, very real. And leadership seemed important.
Our basic principles are duty, respect, and integrity. Within those three principles, the first one is duty, and that's really to our mission. So we talk about being proficient at your job. We talk about making sound and timely decisions, and decision-making under time-critical situations, under stress, with life and death consequences are significant. So we put a lot of value in being an expert in your field, which leads into that second one, which is respect. For us, when we talk about respect, we talk about taking care of our employees, looking out for their well-being, investing into their development into the future, We talk in many principles such as moral courage, the ability to do the right thing because it's the right reasons. Many of those decisions, or having the moral courage to make the appropriate decision as opposed to the easy decision, is not one that is easily done. The third principle is integrity, and really we're talking about developing yourself. It's that taking that introspective look at you as a leader, knowing yourself and what your flaws are, seeking improvement on those things, knowing how you as a leader interact and what the consequences are on that leadership environment in which you operate or which you influence.
The wildland fire community has adopted duty, respect, and integrity. And making sense of those, to me, it really starts individually, because they can sure as heck just be words unless you make them something to you. You have to make them real for yourself in order to be able to communicate them to others.
I was raised with traditional stories of leadership, Robert E. Lee, John Buford at Gettysburg. And I also was raised with personal examples of leadership. This was my father in Vietnam. And I was raised to believe that soldiers were strong and wise and brave and faithful. They didn't lie, cheat, steal, or abandon their comrades. And I still believe real leaders are like that.
A couple things that stand out to me from what I learned from leaders that I worked for. The one that really stands out is that we could contribute. We had ideas that we could expand upon, and we could contribute to the greater good. We could come up with and develop training. And we were really limited by our imagination and our will to do it. The second thing that stands out is the values and actions that I was able to observe from those leaders. I was able to see it and what that meant to me. The sense of duty, to drive, to commit to developing yourself, to learning, to becoming a student, to do the right things with integrity, to seek and try to look internally and evaluate yourself and see if you're doing the right things. Ask yourself those questions. The respect and caring and looking out for the people that work for you.
The ability for a leader to provide good, clear intent up front, what we call commander's intent or leader's intent. And we typically would put that in context of task, purpose, and end state. When that fog of war sets in, that our leaders know how to navigate. We know what the end state is. We know where we need to be. We know why we need to be there. And we know what our task is. And so when that immediate supervisor or that leader is not there, that intent is at least clear, and they know to navigate toward that final end point or that desired outcome.
The task is usually pretty intuitive. Sometimes the end state's pretty intuitive as well. The purpose is the one that I think requires the most thought, to be able to communicate the why. Why are we doing what we're doing? The end state is you can start painting that picture of what it should look like by the end.
When 9/11 came, 46-year-old Brigadier General McChrystal sees a whole new world. First, the things that are obvious that you're familiar with. The environment change, the speed, the scrutiny, the sensitivity of everything now is so fast, sometimes it evolves faster than people have time to really reflect on it. But everything we do is in a different context. More importantly, the force that I led was spread over more than 20 countries. And instead of being able to get all the key leaders for a decision together in a single room and look them in the eye and build their confidence and get trust from them, I'm now leading a force that's dispersed. And I've got to use other techniques. I've got to use video teleconferences. I've got to use chat. I've got to use email. I've got to use phone calls. I've got to use everything I can, not just for communication, but for leadership. A 22-year-old individual operating alone, thousands of miles from me, has got to communicate to me with confidence. I have to have trust in them and vice versa. And I also have to build their faith. And that's a new kind of leadership for me. We had one operation where we had to coordinate it from multiple locations. An emerging opportunity came, didn't have time to get everybody together. So we had to get complex intelligence together. We had to line up the ability to act It was sensitive. We had to go up the chain of command, convince them that this was the right thing to do, and do all of this on electronic medium. We failed. The mission didn't work. And so now what we had to do is I had to do reach out to try to rebuild the trust of that force, rebuild their confidence, me in them and them in me, and our seniors in us as a force, all without the ability to put a hand on a shoulder. Entirely new requirement.
The technological advances are pretty amazing. Where we've come in such a short amount of time, the capabilities of cell phones and tablets, all this information, all this data is out there available to help to pass and share that information, to turn those unknowns into knowns in some capacity. But those technological advances can also be points of friction as well.
We have a tendency to rely on those technology advancements, and in some cases we reduce the value of the human factors that are associated with decision making. The individuals that are on the fire line that they can touch, feel, see, hear, and in many cases many of our firefighters, we know something's different and we just can't tell you exactly what it is. You know, we're relying on that gut instinct. We rely on those subconscious messages from time to time to say there is something here that I'm not liking, and when that hair stands up on the back of your neck. Technology cannot replace those decisions. There are a lot of definitions of resilience, but I would quantify resilience as the ability to respond to the negative things that occur. In terms of ecosystems, it's really that ability to self-heal. And so for organizations, I would also say that's the same thing, the ability to continue moving forward and not to succumb to those adverse effects that occur. Within the wildland fire arena, resilient teams are so critical, because I can't think of a day in my career that when I started the day with a plan, that at the end of the day I said, wow, that went exactly as planned. And so the ability to respond and to adapt to those factors that come in that are unforeseen or even unexpected, the ability to respond to those and continue moving forward and maintain the same operational tempo is critical.
Also, the people had changed. You probably think that the force that I led was all steely-eyed commandos with big knuckled fists carrying exotic weapons. In reality, much of the force I led looked exactly like you. It was men, women, young, old, not just from military, from different organizations, many of them detailed to us just on a handshake. And so instead of giving orders, you're now building consensus and you're building a sense of shared purpose. Probably the biggest change was understanding that the generational difference, the ages had changed so much. I went down to be with a Ranger platoon on an operation in Afghanistan. We talked about the operation, and then at the end I did what I often do with a force like that. I asked, where were you on 9/11? And one young Ranger in the back, his hair's tousled and his face is red and windblown from being in combat in the cold Afghan wind. He says, sir, I was in the 6th grade. And it reminded me that we're operating a force that must have shared purpose and shared consciousness, and yet he has different experiences, in many cases a different vocabulary, a completely different skill set in terms of digital media than I do and to many of the other senior leaders. And yet we need to have that shared sense. It also produced something which I call an inversion of expertise, because we had so many changes at the lower levels in technology and tactics and whatnot, that suddenly the things that we grew up doing wasn't what the force was doing anymore. So how does a leader stay credible and legitimate when they haven't done what the people you're leading are doing? And it's a brand new leadership challenge, and it forced me to become a lot more transparent, a lot more willing to listen, a lot more willing to be reverse mentored from lower. And yet, you're not all in one room.
Those galvanizing events of the wildland fire community, those long before my time and those that have been within my career as a fire professional. South Canyon as an example. In 2014, this is the 20th anniversary of that event, and for myself as a young hotshot crew member at the time, hotshots and smoke jumpers died on the hill that day. That was a huge event for us, and that was a defining moment in many of our careers. And now, with the 20th anniversary of South Canyon occurring in 2014 this year, we have firefighters that weren't born when that event was such a defining moment for us. And unfortunately, with the events that occurred in 2013 with the fatalities on the Yarnell Hill fire, those firefighters that were lost are now that galvanizing event for the next generation of firefighters. And so for us as leaders in the wildland fire world, that is a constant challenge of trying to relate with our generational differences, the ability to communicate with an individual from one generation versus the other generation, the mindset or the motivations that may drive one individual versus another, and just simply how they process information is different.
The South Canyon example, 20 years from South Canyon. You know, the thing that stands out in my mind with that is that where we were before and where we are today, we got to see this pretty significant transformation with leadership curriculum to leading in the Wildland Fire Service, leadership blog, leadership webpage, tools, staff rides, sand tables, after-action reviews. None of these existed in our world prior to that. As we get farther away from that, it's the norm. It always was. IRPG always was for the generations as they come in. And so to see that come about, you know, I remember the IRPG when it first came out and how it was this so much smaller than a fireline handbook, and it fit in your shirt pocket, and it had a leadership element into it. The leadership curriculum has always been kind of a grassroots movement. South Canyon inspired my generation to move forward and to drive the leadership curriculum and to develop tools. It'll be interesting to see what the generation comes does with Yarnell.
Having friends who lost their lives on the Yarnell Hill fire in 2013, I worry that we will continue to rely on technology and push more technological advancements as opposed to just focusing on the decision making that occurs, recognizing those human factors and the pressures that occur and are placed upon all of our leaders at all levels of the organization with very short decision space, taking in thousands of variables, and just because we do things and get away with it 1,000 times does not mean that the 1,001st time we're going to get away with it. And recognizing that very good leaders, excellent leaders, can still make bad decisions. And that's not to say that failure is desirable, but it's acceptable, recognizing that in that pathway moving through any individual's career or just in a leadership position, that not all decisions will have an optimal outcome. And even our best leaders have a little scuffed paint from time to time as they navigate that complex and windy road to those areas where we put them on the pedestal. But all leaders have had challenges, have tried things, and have failed along the process. But that failure is recognized and moved on from. And then finally, it would be innovation, an environment that encourages innovation and encourages complex problem solving and that ability to look for new ways of doing business. And one of the quotes that I'll be paraphrasing, but it's Albert Einstein once said, "We cannot solve our problems utilizing the same thinking that we did when we created them."
There's always obstacles, budget, training, nominations, budget cuts, travel cap. The stuff's always going to be there in some way or another. I think the future's wide open, and the generations that are coming up are going to be the ones to really drive that. What is the next evolution? How do we train people differently now than what we've been currently? And so what Yarnell might mean to this generation is, where do we go from here?
Last point I just want to make, and that is that we can provide all the resources. We can make sure that they're well coordinated. But as I just told these firefighters, what we can't do is to provide them with the courage and the determination and the professionalism, the heart that they show when they're out there battling these fires.
I came to believe that a leader isn't good because they're right. They're good because they're willing to learn and to trust. This isn't easy stuff. It's not like that electronic abs machine where 15 minutes a month you get washboard abs. And it isn't always fair. You can get knocked down, and it hurts. And it leaves scars. But if you're a leader, the people you've counted on will help you up. And if you're a leader, the people who count on you need you on your feet. Thank you.